Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call to order the January 22nd, 2024 meeting of the Town of Keo Island Board of Zoning Appeals. I'm Frank Cassidy, the board chair, and the board members who are here to hear the cases and conduct other business today are Phil Adams, Ben Farabee, Morris Hannon, Lynn O'Leary, Larry Rosenfeld, and myself. And staff members present are John Taylor Jr., our planning director, Daniel Vincent from our planning staff, and Joe Wilson, our attorney. Before we get to the cases, our first order of business today is the election of officers for this year. I'm going to open the nomination process now. Can I entertain a nomination for the position of chair?
I nominate you, Frank.
Second.
I second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Is there any further nominations? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you, I think. Next is the position of vice chair, who is currently Jay, who is not here today due to a health issue. Can I entertain a nomination for vice chair? Jay's been nominated. Is there a second?
I'll second.
There's a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, Jay is elected for another term. Finally, the position of secretary. Per the town's rules of procedure, our planning director, John Taylor, is our secretary. Someone care to nominate him?
I'll nominate John.
And a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. That takes care of the officers for today. Our case rulings from this and any BZA meeting are available for public review and inspection during normal business hours at the town hall. This meeting is being broadcast over the internet, so for that reason, as well as to help our court reporter, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand and I'll recognize you. I'd like to ask the members of the public who are here if you're generally familiar with the procedural workings of the BZA. If everyone is familiar, I'll skip the details of how we work. Everybody okay with that? To be okay. All right. Because this is a quasi-judicial body, everything said in this meeting must be true, complete, and accurate because our hearing is a public fact-finding meeting in compliance with the Freedom of Information Act and South Carolina Code 6-29-70. All of the information provided to the BZA is considered evidence, and this board may certify contempt of circuit court if false statements are made, either in writing or orally. Because of this, each person who wishes to address the board will be sworn in. In order to expedite that procedure, I'd ask those of you who intend to speak today to please rise, and Joe Wilson will administer the oath.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I'll now call case BZA 23-000019 at 213 Glen Abbey. The staff will present facts pertinent to the case. I shall then ask the applicant to address the case. The applicant will please stand at the podium, state your name and current address for the record before presenting testimony. I'll then ask anyone else who wishes to speak to come to the podium, state your name and address, and so forth. Give your statement, which will be limited to 3 minutes. The applicant will also have an opportunity for rebuttal to those public comments. Be reminded that all persons who wish to speak shall direct their comments to the board, not the applicant or other speakers or parties of interest. With that, we'll head it to the first case. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our first case of this afternoon is case BZA 23-000019. This is a variance request for the subject property located at 213-213 Glen Abbey. The property owners 213H Glen Abbey LLC and 213W Glen Abbey LLC are requesting a variance for the reduction of the required 15-foot side setback for approximately 9 square feet, being represented by Mr. Doug Watts. This is an encroachment into the side setback by approximately 9 square feet. The subject property is located in the R1 residential zoning district and is approximately just under 22,000 square feet in size. The ordinance does dictate that this subject property has a front setback of 25 feet, a side setback of 15, and the rear setback of 20 feet. Maximum lot coverage for this particular site is 33%. Here is a zoning map showing the subject property located in that R1 residential zoning area. Adjacent to the north and to the south are similar properties, zone R1 residential. And across the street, the Parks and Recreation zoning district, where the resort overlay zoning district also applies. This particular subject property is under the purview of Kiawah Island Architectural Review Board. Just as part of the property history, the subject property did underwent zoning review in 2021 and was issued a zoning approval on April 5th of 2021. That subject property also went building review in 2021 as well, issuing a building permit April 22nd of 2021. Those permit numbers have been included as part of the record. Its certificate of occupancy was issued on January 9th, 2023. The existing lot coverage for this subject property is 36.83%. Here you can see just some images of the subject property. This is the entrance drive, the subject property. Adjacent properties looking across Glen Abbey is the golf course. Adjacent properties. A few images of the side of the subject property. Showing vegetation here towards the property rear. And again, subject property, the areas in question will be shown on this slide. You can see on the right image the area in question that's part of the garage. Here's a site plan of the subject property showing Glen Abbey to the west, subject property to the north side of this particular site plan as the area in question. Here again to the north, showing the subject area. The applicant's plans, it does include a portion of the existing house which encroaches into that side setback. This is by approximately 1 foot 6 inches, totaling a total of 9 square feet, which is the 15-foot required setback. The structure was constructed as permitted. However, an encroachment into the side setback, which this area is cantilevered, does exist. That cantilever element of submitted plans is located on the north side of that garage as shown. The applicant did brought this to attention to the town as well as the Kiawah Island Architectural Review Board, in which after review, the Kiawah Island Architectural Review Board as well as the town issued, Kiawah Island Architectural Review Board issued approval for the variance request looking at this particular application on July 21st of 2023. And they have stated that as part of that, conditionally, to install 3 varied height refoliated cabbage palms in the location shown. And those images were part of your site materials, your materials for today. Staff did conduct a site visit as part of this. This particular case was tabled from our previous meeting and is being heard today. An additional site visit, because of that being re-advertised, January 5th was that site visit in addition to the original October 27th, 2023 date. Staff has found as part of the findings based on the approval criteria outlined in section 12-163. This is pertaining to first criteria A. Staff believes that there may be extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the property due to the irregular shape of the lot. Subject property is more narrow at the front than the rear, and there is also an existing 20-foot utility easement located to the south. The applicant's letter of intent does state the unusual condition regarding this particular property is narrowing of the lot at the front of the property. When you look at criteria B, these conditions may be unique to the subject property. Properties in the vicinity may or may not have similar zoning designations. I've outlined that the R1, respectively, to the north and south are the same zoning district. Just across to the east is the Parks and Recreation zoning district with and the property to the west underneath the Resort Overlay zoning district. Per the applicant's letter of intent, quote, "We are not aware of any similar lot condition in the immediate area. This condition would only apply to other properties in the vicinity in which the front line narrows down on a particular lot." Criteria C, the application is ordinance to 213 Glen Abbey would prohibit the construction of the cantilevered structure as a portion of the structure encroaches into the required 15-foot side setback. However, this is not unreasonable to restrict the utilization of the property per the applicant's letter of intent. Quote, "An unnecessary hardship is present when the front of the property narrows down the width to the entrance of the property." Criteria D, the authorization of this variance, it may not be of substantial detriment to the adjacent property or the public good. The subject property is legally nonconforming with regards to the setbacks, and existing structure encroaches into the setback. The proposed structure encroaches minimally into the side setback, and this is by approximately 1 foot 6 inches, and a total of encroachment of 9 square feet. The structure was constructed as permitted, and the subject property is properly screened with dense vegetation on the north side from the adjacent property to the north. The area in question is not visible from the street right away, and per the applicant's letter of intent, the portion that is encroaching into the setback is only visible from one of the adjacent properties. There is natural vegetation and added vegetation between the portion of the home and the side property line. Criteria E, the grantee of this variance would not allow the establishment of a use not otherwise permitted within this zoning district, nor will it extend physically a non-conforming use of land or change the zoning district boundaries. The applicant's letter of intent did state, quote, "The granting of the variance will not allow for a use not permitted by the ordinance." Criteria F, the BZA may not consider profitability when considering this variance request. The applicant's letter of intent states, quote, "The sole purpose for the variance is to enhance the livability and functionality of the entrance of the property." Criteria G, the need for the variance may not be the result of the applicant's own actions. The existing structure was permitted as the Town of Kiowa Island and Kiowa Island Architectural Review Board has reviewed those constructed as permitted, and the subject property is legally nonconforming with regards to those setbacks. The need for the variance was due to the result of the applicant's, the need for the variance was due to the result of the ARB asking for the house to be moved for functionality, not by a request of the owner. Looking at criteria H. Criteria H, the granting of the variance, it may not be contrary to the public or neighborhood interests, may not adversely affect other property in the vicinity, nor interfere with the harmony, spirit, and intent. The purposes of these regulations, the cantilevered area encroaches minimally and is not visible from the street. The subject property has dense vegetation planting adjacent to the area in question, And the applicants stated in their letter of intent, the owner will be notifying the neighbors regarding the BZA meeting and intent of the meeting. Criteria I, the granting of the variance, it may not be substantially conflict with the comprehensive plan or purposes of the ordinance. The applicant's proposed plans does meet the lot coverage requirement for the subject property, and the cantilever minimally encroaches into that side setback, which is to the north. Granting of this variance within the applicant's letter of intent states that we believe will not conflict with the comprehensive plan or the purposes of the ordinance due to the small amount being over the setback. That is shifting the home towards the setback allows for a grander, non-constricted entrance of this magnificent home, end quote. Granted the approval criteria in the event that the Board of Zoning Appeals does consider approval for this. Staff has outlined two conditions that we think should be considered by the board, which would be providing a landscape plan for review and installing, which have already been installed based on the Kiawah Island Architecture Review Board, conditions of refoliage cabbage palms. Are there any questions? I wanted to also state that we had just, I think maybe one phone call regarding, but no other particular public letters submitted as part of this particular application.
Any questions for John?
Yes.
Who approved the fact that the house is larger than the 33%?
So our ordinance grants the ability for houses to go beyond 33% given certain criteria is met. And so those have met the criteria, so the town did approve that particular house going larger than the 33%.
What are the criteria that, I had that same question. What are the criteria that you need to
So
meet?
there's approval criterion where pervious versus impervious surfaces. In section 12-63, there's a number of things. Granted, if there are elements of pervious walk, those can be counted towards an allowable increase, which is a maximum of 20% based on the 33%. And so that 20% is where that allocations of pervious surfaces would have allowed this to go greater than 33%.
So it doesn't have to go through the BZA then?
No, as long as it meets that standard, it would not require Board of Zoning Appeals approval.
And the letter of intent uses the word variance after in the ARB near the bottom of the first paragraph. Does that mean the ARB issued a variance? I didn't know they were allowed to, or am I just misreading it?
So the ARB does issue variances from their particular process or standards or guidelines. And we have a copy of that included, I think, right behind the letter of intent. If you see within their materials that the ARB approved that.
But we have to approve their variance.
We're not approving the ARB's variance, or the variances from the standards of our zoning code.
So if we turn it down, what happens to the ARB variance, out of curiosity?
These are independent processes, so we, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Just a quick question. If the ARB approved the variance for the larger space, and then it also said they had to do something to the driveway, the turning radius in the driveway, and that affected where the house was positioned, at what point did anybody think of going back and looking at the plot plans and making sure that everything was actually within the regulational lines that they were supposed to be and within all the setbacks? If the ARB asked them to move it, why did nobody follow up to make sure that with the move, they were going to be within the setbacks?
That would be a question for our Architectural Review Board. I couldn't answer, or the applicant. I mean, it wasn't part of the decisions of the siting of the particular home during that design process.
The applicant.
Okay, I'll ask the applicant.
Any other questions for John? Okay, we'll hear now from the applicant.
I'm Bill Duncan, 213 Glen Abbey. My family owns the property. I had a statement I was going to read, but it would pretty much be redundant based on what Mr. Taylor just said. I mean, just the nutshell of this is that, our architect submitted plans that noted this encroachment in the spring of 21. Those were approved by the ARB. The permit set shows it. It just wasn't caught. So, we went through the process with the ARB, got the approval with them, and completed the mitigation that they asked for. Tommy suggested verbally to us that we should follow up with the town to see if any other approvals were necessary. And so we contacted Mr. Taylor and wanted to make sure that we had any loose ends that were tied up, and that's how I'm here today. So that's really my statement. If there's any questions I can answer.
That had the question.
Yeah.
How is it that when they asked you to reposition the house for the parking, that nobody relooked at the lot lines to make sure that you were going to be within all your setbacks? I
asked that very same question at the ARB variance meeting. And so, I'm not here to point fingers at anybody or anything like that.
But did your builder catch it and nobody caught it throughout this whole process?
It was caught we became aware of this when the ARB did their final inspection. So, and I asked the same question you're asking, but did not get a response. But the ARB did, like I said, like Mr. Taylor said, approve the variance, and we completed the mitigation. So I could speculate on what happened, but I'm not sure that that's appropriate. So, but from the standpoint of the homeowner, we've done everything that we are supposed to do, in addition to reaching out to the town and bringing this to their attention to make sure that we tied up our loose ends.
Ultimately, it's the architect's responsibility, isn't it?
I can't say. I mean, we hired what we understand and think is one of the top architectural companies that work on the island, Mark Kamens, and I don't know what happened.
Did the town go out? John, this is my question too. We have a building permit person that goes out, an inspector. Did any of them notice any of this going on at any given point before the Duncans had an erected home?
So for zoning approval, once that site plan has been approved, we typically don't go in and do a site inspection unless there's something that's caught by the building department. Our building department is not necessarily reviewing siting the home. They're looking more of our building code standards. So if there's an issue with MEP, mechanical, electrical, or foundation, and even if this were to be cited by the building department, it would have been based on the approved plans. So that's the other thing to take into note.
But if everything's off of the approved plans, are they off the approved initial plans or off of the approved plans when the house had to be rearranged? And you know what I'm saying? If they're looking at it as this was the initial plan and this all looked good, and then the ARB said, okay, now we want the house to go this way a little bit, did they go back in and look at the this way a little bit instead of the original to make sure that everything, I mean, it's sort of like this whole thing fell through the cracks, not that the homeowners intended it to be that way, but all the people that were supposed to check it, didn't.
Right,
and now they're coming for a variance that should have been caught. If the ARB asked them to move something, somebody should have looked at those lines and said, hey, this house is not going to be in compliance. Even if it's only 2 feet, it's not going to be in compliance. Somebody asked them to move something and then nobody double checked to make sure that it was done correct, that if they moved it, it would be correct.
Yes.
Yeah, can you repeat your question?
Who was supposed to check this? I mean, at what point did the ARB go out after they approved the repositioning of the home to make sure that it was not going to need a variance, that it was going to lay within the setbacks?
So Just as our standard sort of operation of once a house has been gone through final inspection, our zoning department doesn't go out and verify. Our building department would do that as part of their review based on where that foundation of the home is located. What the Architectural Review Board and the homeowners have stated is that this siding occurred once that final inspection was noted. And so this doesn't happen often, but there are a few instances where a home may have been built beyond where would have been originally permitted. However, this was built to what was on the permitted plans.
But that's my point. So who looked at the permitted plans once they turned the house, as was suggested by the ARB, to make sure that once the house was turned, that it was going to sit within the setbacks? That's the question.
So that would have been, the ARB making recommendations on the siding of the house happens prior to any formal approval. So that would be, what once they have modified their location of the home, that would have went through zoning and through a building department for review. So the town would have been seeing both the town's planning department and both the town's building department would have seen the permitted construction documents for this particular home. And
After it had been turned?
After it would have been turned.
Okay, so nothing was, at this point, there was no foundation in the ground yet because it was all in the planning stages, if I understand this correctly. The house was turned a little bit, and so everyone's supposed to check this to make sure that, I can't believe Mark Kamin's missed this. I mean,
So I probably want to be straight. I don't think that this would be on the particular architect because the architect's plans did note the cantilevered element.
But it's, can I interrupt for 1 second? But at some point, before they start anything and they decide, okay, we're gonna shift the house this amount, they stake out the area on the ground, do they not?
yes, that's what
And once they stake it out, someone comes out, I assume, from the Department of Buildings and measures to make
They're-
sure that they
they're-
didn't build it in the middle of Glen Abbey Road, for example. I
They're
mean,
only
it's-
staking out the foundation of the home. So this would have not been caught until a final inspection. So
In other words,
this is,
Before they pour the foundation, they don't inspect the staking?
the
Make sure that that's set up correctly?
staking would only capture the foundation. It would not capture a cantilevered element.
It's up in the air.
But still, the plans are very, definitive that this is gonna be an overhang. I mean, and, there's no way in the heck we're gonna have you remove the overhang, that's at least in my opinion. I mean, this was just a failure of the system all the way, because nobody set the house and to fit within the guidelines. They all said, okay, we can use this, adjustment, or we can vary this, or we'll get a variance here, or this and that. It's just a failure of the system when the new plot was situated, nobody actually went out and measured and said, well, according to the plans, there's gonna be an overhang here. If we move this wall 18 inches this way, there's no overhang, solves the whole problem. But nobody did that. In my opinion, somebody should have.
This might shed some insight, and this is from the homeowner's perspective, but we, just racking my brain back to the planning phases, it's a sort of a rectangular narrow lot, and we were fighting the lot coverage. The longer the driveway was, the more impervious coverage we were gonna take, and was a big oak tree hanging towards the interior of the lot, so they were juggling these things, the impervious coverage, siting the house and trying to, protect this
I
oak tree.
understand
So
all
that's-
that.
yeah.
My only problem is that nobody actually went out and checked the site versus the plans before they actually started construction, which would have alleviated this entire situation.
Well, and we.
And I think you suffered because of it, because you have to go through this rigmarole.
Well, we also, in addition, we completed a substantial amount of mitigation, including, the pervious driveway material. We planted, I don't even remember, but several massive magnolia trees on one side of the house. And then the final thing was we also did the mitigation for the box window overhang. So anyway.
Not saying you didn't do
Yeah,
everything
no,
for
I
it.
just,
Yeah.
am-
Well, I think it's terrible that you have to, I just don't think that it's fair to ask somebody to plant plants somewhere where another partner in this made the error, and to put that back, the onus back on the homeowner. I mean, Tommy's not here today to even discuss this with us.
Maybe so, but it's not our
It's
purview.
not our purview, but it's our purview in the sense that they've asked him to plant things to cover something that should have been caught. So that's the only reason I brought that up, Frank, is that
Yeah.
they're asking him to hide their mistake.
I think it's clear we had some systematic failures here, but we are where we are. And the question is, do we grant this variance request? Are there other questions?
thank you.
I'd entertain a motion. Anyone
I'll
wishes
make
to
a
make?
motion that we approve, with a codicil that we verbally chastise the people who let this get to this point. Homeowners should never be punished for errors of other people in this case. There's no reason to have you have to gone through this and whatever situation went through, but I think it should be approved, as is.
Second by Phil. With regard to the potential condition we could put on this that John mentioned, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the cabbage palms have already been installed, correct?
Yes, they look good, by the way.
Landscape plan is completely finished? Yes. Okay, so, would you accept a modification to include, no problem, okay. All right, moved and seconded. Any further comment or discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously. Thank you, everyone. I will now call 166 Marsh Hawk. Yeah, I'm not sure whether it's 166 or 179.
It's
179.
179.
I'd like,
179.
like to
I
make
didn't
a,
notice when I went to look at this place. And Dan, you're going to present for the town?
yes, sir. Just like to make one small correction on the agenda. It says 166 Marsh Hawk. It should be 179 Marsh Hawk. That's number and, everything else is correct. Okay, our second and final case today is BZA case 23-000020, located at 179 Marsh Hawk Lane. The applicant and property owners, Susan and Douglas McKinney, being represented by Daryl Cobb, are requesting a variance for the reduction of the required 30-foot rear setback for approximately 150 square feet for a proposed screened porch enclosure. TMS number is 207-03-00-011. The property is located in the R20 residential zoning district, and the lot size is approximately 5,490 square feet, 0.13 acres. The Town of Kiawah Island zoning ordinance requires a front setback of 20 feet from Marsh Hawk Lane, right side setback of 7 feet, a left side setback with wall of 3 feet, and a 30-foot rear setback along the OCRM critical line. Subject property has a maximum lot coverage of, allowable lot coverage of 50%. And the existing lot coverage is currently 49.89%, which does include the garage being built right now. Here's a overlay of the zoning map. As you can see, the subject property is located in the R2 with the R2O overlay. The subject property sits adjacent to the marsh to the north, and the adjacent properties to the east and the west and to the south are also located in the R2O residential zoning district. The subject property is subject to review by the Kiawah Island Architectural Review Board. And as I stated before, the subject property is currently under construction for a garage addition at the front of the property, which was permitted in October 31st, 2023. Here's an aerial of the subject property. Staff took a site visit and took a few images. Front of the property, the garage to the left. Adjacent properties across the street. Side of the property. The rear of the property. And the area staked out with tape is the property or the subject property in question. So the applicant's proposed plans include converting an existing open deck on the northeast side of the property to a screened-in porch, as well as the removal of the existing open deck on the northwest corner of the home. Current structure, including the existing deck, is approximately 150 square feet, and this is legally conforming with regards to setbacks. Our code has an ordinance which allows uncovered decks to extend up to 5 feet into any required setback. The applicant has submitted to the Kiawah Island Architectural Review Board, and on September 20th, 2023, the ARB granted approval of the rear setback encroachment, stating, quote, "The variance to increase the existing rear setback encroachment by adding a screened porch in the footprint of your existing rear deck is approved given compatibility with the architecture and similar conditions as neighboring properties," end quote. The KRB also stated in their approval letter, quote, "Please note that this increase in the roof mass of the house may not in future be converted into any enclosed heated or cooled area. Variance is granted for a screened porch as shown in the permit documents," end quote. Moving on to the variance criteria. For criteria A, there are extraordinarily and exceptional conditions pertaining to this particular piece of property. There may be extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the piece of property due to the position of the residence and its adjacency to the OCRM critical line. Criteria B, these conditions do not generally apply to other properties in the vicinity. These conditions may be unique to the subject property. The subject property is located in R2O zoning district. Adjacent properties to the east, west, and to the south across, here's another correction, it says Glen Abbey, but that should be corrected to Marsh Hawk. So again, the adjacent properties to the east, west, and south across Marsh Hawk are also located in the R20 residential zoning district. Subject property sits adjacent to the marsh to the south, and existing structures may or may not have similar encroachments based on these setback standards. Criteria C, application of this ordinance would effectively prohibit or restrict the utilization of the property. The application of this ordinance to 179 Marsh Hawk Lane would prohibit the conversion of the proposed screened-in porch as the proposed structure encroaches into the required setback. However, it does not unreasonably restrict the utilization of the subject property. Criteria D, the authorization of the variance will not be of substantial detriment to the adjacent property or the public good. The character of the zoning district will not be harmed by the granting of this variance. The authorization of this variance may not be of such substantial detriment to the adjacent properties or the public good. Proposed porch addition suggests an encroachment of 150 square feet, and the footprint of the home will not be changed by the granting of this variance. For the applicant's letter of intent, quote, "We are not proposing to alter the footprint of the existing deck in any way, and the area will not be heated or cooled," end quote. Criteria E, the BZA shall not grant a variance that would allow the establishment of a use not otherwise permitted. The granting of this variance would not allow the establishment of a use not otherwise permitted in this zoning district, extend physically a non-conforming use of land, or change the zoning district boundaries. Criteria F, the BZA may not consider profitability when considering this variance request. Criteria G, the need for this variance shall not be a result of the applicant's own actions. Staff believes the need for this variance may be the result of the applicant's own actions. The existing structure is legally non-conforming with regards to setbacks. Granting criteria H, granting the variance will not be contrary to the public or neighborhood interests, nor will adversely affect other properties in the vicinity. Granting of this variance may not be of contrary to the public or neighborhood interest, and it may not adversely affect other properties in the vicinity, nor interfere with the harmony, spirit, intent, and purpose of these regulations. Per the applicant's letter of intent, quote, "We are not proposing to alter the footprint of the existing deck in any way, and the area will not be heated or cooled," end quote. And criteria I, granting of this variance does not substantially conflict with the comprehensive plan or the purposes of this ordinance. Staff believes the granting of this variance may not be of substantially conflict with the comprehensive plan or the purposes of this ordinance. The applicant's proposed plans meet the lot coverage requirements, and per the applicant's letter of intent, quote, "This change will also not affect the lot coverage calculations," end quote. The Board of Zoning Appeals may approve with conditions, or deny this case. In the event that the board considers approval of this case, staff made the following recommendation for a condition, and that is provide a detailed plan to ensure the existing 20-foot live oak adjacent to the deck is not damaged during construction of the screened-in porch. That concludes staff's review.
Questions for Dan? This may be a question for the applicant, but I'll put it out there now, and you just quoted it, Dan. This change will also not affect the lot coverage calculations. They are not increasing the size of the deck on the northeast, but they're removing the deck on the northwest. Why doesn't the lot coverage go down?
So, the applicant already submitted, plans for the garage addition. And that may have included the, removal of that wooden porch.
Okay,
So that may be the answer.
okay, got it.
And the 49% includes the new garage and eliminates the other deck.
That is correct. Yep. So the applicant kind of split up these two changes into two different zoning zoning permits. So one permit is for the garage, and the other variance that we're talking about right now is that screened-in porch.
Other questions? Yeah, why don't we
When we
wait
get
till
there.
he comes up? Mr. Cobb, would you like to approach the podium?
Hi, I'm Darrell Cobb, and I'm the architect for Doug and Susan over here. This will probably be one of the easiest presentations I've had to do, or shortest. They have an existing deck on the back of their house, and it's just not that usable with the bugs and stuff, so they would like to convert it to a screen porch. We're not growing the footprint one bit. It's being built directly above the existing deck.
It says in here, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, no, go.
Okay. It says in here that they're not to be heated or cooled.
Not heated and not cooled, yes, sir.
That at the moment or in perpetuity?
Just a screen porch. So they have nobody's ever asked me about heating and cooling the screen porch. They simply want to use their deck. There's very little outdoor space on these little houses over there. They're just trying to get, I guess that's your sole purpose. That you could ask them, but nobody's said anything to me about heated and cooled. And it sounds like you're going to put a clause in there that's saying it can never be heated and cooled, which I believe they don't care about either. Oh, yeah. The owners have no intentions to heat and cool it, to the best of my knowledge. You can also ask them. There's sitting right there.
This might be for you, it might be for staff, I'm not sure. So what's the rationale of the policy that says, well, it's okay to have an uncovered deck that encroaches, but not okay to have a covered or enclosed deck that encroaches? Without a variance, obviously.
So it does give us, I think, the way I would describe it is that the massing of a roofing deck provides a little bit more impact than an open deck where there's not a roof or any vertical elements. And so that particular element that is encroaching, it only grants us a 5-foot administrative relief. So it's only would be 5 foot into whatever rear setback. But I think it's the element of massing of vertical element structures is the right reason why, the difference between why open deck would be approved administratively.
This won't otherwise affect the roof line of the house, it's just,
Yeah, this is not changing the roof line, well,
it's adding to the roof line, I would assume.
or the, you can
Yeah.
forward.
I should have those drawings.
Yeah.
up.
Inside, be able to see inside one of your drawings there,
There's really only one or two ways to do the roof line.
you have the drawings in?
These are very, very
I think it
big.
was
In your packet of materials, you should have also included, seen the actual site drawings, construction drawings there. On A5 shows, yeah,
It's got a slanted roof on the back.
A5, it marries to the existing roof line.
Yeah, it just kind of follows the same line, just to keep it clean. I have a before and after on A5. If you look up top, that's the deck, and then that's how we're proposing for it to look when we're done.
Other questions? Yes, sir, Ben.
While you will maintain the footprint of the existing one, are you digging new footings into the land?
I'm going to have to put a spot footing under the middle for structure, but it will not be a continuous footing. So meaning it'll be 2 foot wide by 2 foot wide by 1 foot deep, and then there's going to be a cinder block post under that. And that's the only new footings that are being added. I think when my structural engineer looked at this, it was adequately supported, so he's kind of correcting that and adding for the columns that we're adding.
Mine was similar to Ben's question. When you add the new footings, is it going anywhere near the roots of the tree? No? Okay, that was.
And again, from the little bit I know about trees, the tree grows towards the marsh, and they say the root systems follow that, so that it should not affect the footing.
Thank you.
Other questions?
And you're putting that in the middle, right? Is that what you're saying?
Can you go back to the picture that had the tree all wrapped in the,
Will that,
It won't go on the screen, but it'll go on the.
got it. I would want to look at the foundation plan before because I don't want to be wrong.
Can you pull up that?
But I believe it's just one spot footing in the middle.
Here's the tree.
here's the tree, so this is where.
And it's where the existing beam is now, I believe.
Oh, definitely, yes.
Sounds
There it is. Yeah, you can see it on sheet A2. Not along the edge, it's kind of underneath. Yeah.
That's the tree over there on the right? Sort of where the arrow is right now?
That arrow goes to the footing, the new spot here we're adding. Can you put this pointer, how does this work?
Tree looks like it's almost in the middle. A little more towards the center of the house.
Oh, I see the tree. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, right there is the new footing. And if you look right, here's a continuous cinder block wall, right here. And then there's a pier on the other side. So they want to support that beam. There's a beam coming across. There's an existing beam that comes across there now. We're thickening that beam and putting one pier in the middle of it.
You are putting electricity out there for like light or something like that?
There's probably already a light out there that they'll.
Because we use ours all the time, night and day, so. Okay.
And staff has suggested a condition for that they submit a detailed plan to ensure the existing live oak is not damaged during construction. So. Any other questions? I'd entertain a motion anyone would like to make.
Motion that we approve with the codicil on the non-damage to the oak and an additional that they do not put in heating or air conditioning because that would increase the heated and air conditioned footprint of the house, which obviously is not supposed to be done.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Larry and
The second part to his proposal was not to add the heating and cooling, because that would add to the square footage of the house, which is already.
doesn't add anything to what the ARB has already said.
Just reinforcing it.
I just wanted to be clear if you were making a motion to say no heat, that space cannot be heated or cooled?
Not be heated or cooled, which is in the
Okay. Okay.
thing right here.
Moved by Larry with two conditions and seconded by Lynn. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously. because this is no increase in the footprint, and this is a reasonable accommodation for this property. Our final piece of business today is the review of changes to our rules of procedure. John, I'm not clear on whether we are here to approve these changes or just look at them, or what?
Right. So you will not be approving anything today. Based on our rules of procedure, anytime that we would propose an amendment, it needs to be introduced to the Board of Zoning Appeals, and it can be voted upon at a subsequent meeting. So at today's meeting, what I wanted to do is just share the rules of procedure. We've not updated these in some time, but I just wanted to make some recommendations for the update. I know our Planning Commission has made recent updates to this rules of procedure, but to familiarize yourself with the rules of procedure, and then today I will introduce what staff is recommending as changes, and then when we have our next meeting, we'll have this added to the agenda. It gives you some time to really think about what's being proposed, and then we can act on it at our next meeting.
Got it. Thank you, John.
So, really three things, maybe four. One is sort of on page 2, board member attendance. This is something that we've carried over since COVID, which would have been members being able to vote virtually if there were attendance. This was not modified in our rules of procedure. I think it was updated in our overall when council did it for the COVID related things, but I wanted to make that consistent with our standard operating of the practices of the Board of Zoning Appeals, which would mean anyone who is attending a particular meeting virtually would be able to be counted as present and able to vote on applications. Historically, the Board of Zoning Appeals has always met in person, and we feel that staff still feel that that is important because there is oftentimes witness that appear before a meeting, and so having that additional unclarity of someone joining via Zoom, sometimes that does not carry over for the same rationale for someone being in person. So we did add in sort of where there's exceptional circumstance. So we just didn't want this to be just where any meeting you attend that you would be able to attend, but where there are exceptional circumstances, that board member may be able to still participate in that meeting.
So the intent is to allow the virtual participation only where exceptional circumstances exist.
Right.
I mean, just the lawyer in me says the word "and" is at least unnecessary there and maybe even a little confusing.
Question. Besides whether the unusual circumstance.
It's a great question. If you have an idea who might that be, we can discuss that, but
I think
I think we
my
should
concern
hold-
being that the more and more we get online, the more and more people will opt to be online rather than. Questioning who decides.
And the other part of it, I've looked at other rules of procedure. Other municipalities have requirements of how many meetings they can particularly attend in virtually. So that could be something to consider. But I can talk with Joe and see what we maybe think might be best. But there's some solutions. But
If you don't say anything, I think it's going to pretty much default to the member.
So I'm just saying, what?
it could
why
be
is
up to
that?
the chairman and the planning director. I mean, we can talk about it. If you have some recommendations, we can.
Saying that's if you're trying to, exceptional circumstances is trying to put a limit on it, there is no limit on it. I mean, I don't think that does. If I just declare, well, it's exceptional. Either do it for certain reasons and not do it for others. But not for all
Well,
reasons.
I suppose one approach might be not to put even more on our honorable chairman's back, but to say, look, the determination is one that's sort of made on an ad hoc basis by the chair as to whether or not the suggested circumstances isn't exceptional. Or another way to do it, perhaps, is or It's not another way to do it, but addition, maybe a minimum number of members have to be present physically for there to be a quorum. That's a different point.
Well, I think that goes in line with, though, because it says here that 2 of the BZA members can, who can own property but are not residents. So if they're not residents, how often are they here to attend the meetings? Which would make me think they would be more apt to always call in if they're here, they own property, but they're more part-time. So they would be more apt to call in. So does that take away from those 2 people having?
So that's always been in there for that reason of wanting to make sure that a bulk of the membership can be available to attend, so.
So it's okay then for the 2 people who have property in Kiowa but are not residents, it's okay for them to call in? And is that considered an exceptional circumstance?
I'm not exclusively just saying
Okay.
that option is available for those who are non-residents. That's not the purpose here. Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure I understood.
Mr. Farabee?
Amendment residents and non-residents.
So, I mean, so I'll add this. If there are other changes that you would recommend while we're doing this process, please share those, and then we can add them in for the next, share those with me, and then we'll add those to the red line proposal for our next draft.
Yeah, I wasn't aware that non-residents were even eligible.
I didn't either.
So that's
We don't have any of those on the current board.
So you're eligible, you just have to be able to have own property in the town. So that's the only caveat. So the distinction there, I think historically, Kiowa has known to have a population that has a sector that is not on island 12 months out of the year. And so to account for some of that, that's sort of maybe how that has been derived from my knowledge.
That says a resident can be a member but not own property.
I'm sorry?
It says here that you can rent here and not own property and be a member of this group.
You can rent here?
Renter.
If you're a
not
renter,
owning
not an owner,
property.
but you,
Full-time.
but it's your
Excluded from being a
primary
member.
residence and you spend 8 months a year here. But just as a renter rather than as an owner.
So I'll compare this back to what's in our zoning code because it should marry what's in our zoning code, which means,
But, yeah.
which would mean you can have a property owner who's on here, who lives here permanently or who owns property, is only here less than a certain amount of time a year.
That would suggest that you have to be a property
You have to be a property
as
owner.
opposed to a resident.
Yeah, so you couldn't just say that you're renting and be eligible for this board.
Yeah.
No, you would need to be,
Some people choose to rent their homes rather than own their homes.
no, but they're not the renter.
No, I mean, not an owner, just a renter.
The
No owns no
the
property
lessee, the
here, but
tenant,
rents
the
it.
occupant,
So a leasee would not be able to be a member of this board.
even though he's a full-time permanent resident of Kiowa
It says a
Island.
renter.
He's
can-
not a resident, though.
Sure he is.
Need to-
I mean, if
Renter who's
if
a
I rent
resident
my
can
apartment
be.
in New York City and live there 100% of the time, I'm a resident of New York City, even though I don't own the apartment.
Well,
right?
we'll clarify that before we bring, yeah.
Okay.
All right.
I'm glad I
And the broader issue is why do we need non-residents to be, I'd like to approach that too.
Okay.
I'd like to raise, so.
Yeah,
think
I'm
it's
kind of
really-
in agreement with that. It seems
Yeah.
to me a simple way to do this is
I put-
do you vote here?
I assumed there was a time when we had as many non-residents or non-residents property owners than we had residents property owners, and we probably still do, but it was a small number of property owner residents, and I assume that
Yeah, so we can, like I said,
we need that anymore.
okay. We'll add that into the discussion points. The next one would be number 13. This goes back to also, even my days at the county of relaying, once we got official public letters, because there's a population on Kiowa of, once that property is noticed, that mail goes elsewhere, they read it, now they've sent that to now their design team. And by the time we get those letters from either a contractor design team or responding to a property owner, the meeting date is less than a week away. And so historically, I've brought any of those public letters that we received, even if it was 2 days before the meeting, to your attention. And so I sort of want to be able to do that, not being able to prevent someone from submitting a written document where you guys have to actually vote on it to take action, to consider it as part of the record. So that was just a recommendation from staff to ensure that any letter that we receive becomes part of the record, and you're not necessarily having to vote in order to consider it.
It's the equivalent of somebody who just comes into the meeting and wants to speak in either pro or con to the situation, so I agree.
The next two items are on the page 5, 20 and 21. These relate to reconsiderations. Over the past, I think maybe 3, maybe 4 years, I've contemplated making this recommendation. There's always been a case or two after reviewing the entire year of cases. This is what Planning Commission 2, like we look at and evaluate all of the cases within a year's time and see how those decisions are rendered. I've looked at other municipalities, and most of them also have what I'm calling a intermediate step between between a rendered decision and a particular case being filed for an appeal. Typically, even in an appeal, mediation would be required, and a lot of times that mediation is rendered back to the BZA to make sure it's reheard before an action is taken by any of the courts. And so these are recommendations that the board essentially would have some metric to be able to administer a reconsideration of a case after it being heard.
Helpful. I couldn't understand why 20 was even in there to begin with. It just sounded like if you got a stupid board that makes a stupid mistake, realize that 30 seconds after they vote for it, they can change it. But there's no time limits on this in terms of when this should take place. And it sounds like it can take place in exactly the same meeting once you vote. Because it says in that meeting or the next meeting that you can
So we can debate all of those issues. One of the initial proposal was that if, for example, if you look at number 21, the last sentence says that if a motion is to reconsider that case, then case will be scheduled and heard at the same or the next available meeting. And in that first sentence, it says at the same meeting or the next meeting. So that would be, in my mind, be the time frame. But if we wanted to add a time frame, we could.
I couldn't follow that. It didn't make sense that we as a group vote for or against a particular item, and then the people who prevailed, someone of them say, well, whoops, I think we made a mistake.
So I think that would have been on the onus of making sure that this just wasn't arbitrary of I didn't like my vote, so let's try to get it reheard again. It was more so that there was truly something substantive in that record that was noticed.
Something that you would have noticed that we overlooked and you're asking us to come back to?
Just because I've dealt with this with town council before, and sometimes people are just confused about how they voted. I mean, things get complicated. That after the meeting, they discover they voted not the way they meant to, right? Yeah. In that situation, under the rules that I've seen, I think under Robert's Rules of Order, you have to make that motion to reconsider that day or the next day. So it's a very short time frame as well. So it's more applicable to someone, leaving the meeting and someone's like, why'd you vote that way? You said you were going to vote the other way. And they're like, oh, is that what happened? And that happens. I mean, it's happened twice that I've seen.
It's the proverbial vote where they say, no, I do want to do it.
Kind of like that,
It's a negative, positive.
Yeah, I mean, the chair here has a habit of saying, just to be sure, in this case, a yes vote is to disapprove the application, right? But sometimes that doesn't always,
that may not happen in the future either. So.
I agree with Ben that we should take another look at the language here, which is kind of awkward. There were a couple things that I thought were needed here. First off, I think in most administrative type bodies, there's the ability for an applicant to make a motion for reconsideration before they have to go to court. Right now, you can't do that. If you want to come back again, you got to modify your plan. And I can think of at least one case we've had where the presentation just was not good. And you know, I can see the applicant wanting to come back and make a better presentation. And I think we ought to allow that.
Without voting on A or nay. I mean,
I don't think you can come back, John, if I'm not wrong, without changing the plan.
we can ask for more information. We say it's not clear, that's the information that we're
But
hearing, so.
To
we'd
Mr.
like-
Cassidy's point, if the board makes that decision saying, hey, we can table this particular, that typically is not happen where the board is saying, let's table this for more information or
When we did have that, I think we're talking about the case with Tula, is that the case?
Yes.
Yeah, the
Okay,
Tula
but-
case. Yeah.
So, but though, I think the part with that case was that she was more confused than we were. I mean,
Exactly.
and so she was ill-prepared to make a presentation, and then, because you did give her the option, if I'm not mistaken, do you want to represent
I
this?
did.
And she was more flustered than the time,
But she said no.
she did say no, but I don't really know if,
The problem
I think she
is,
came in not knowing what to expect.
I guess it's a quantitative number. When they come back, there has to be something substantive that they're changing. They just can't come back in and say, oh, I want to present the same goods again. So the question is, how do you quantify what makes a case
so.
of coming back?
Based on what's written today, if an applicant would present the same application, they would not be able to, based on our current code.
Right.
Because that application has been
But how
denied.
much of a change do they have to
And-
make?
and
I
this-
mean, if, for example, one of the cases, they want to build a deck outside, and it's going to intrude 150 feet into the overview, 150 square feet. If they come back, it's 149, is that considered substantive? Or if they come back and it's down to 37 feet, that's substantive.
So
So-
that particular example is,
Who's Frank to make that decision?
that particular example is how we administer it today. So if someone submitted an application for a variance for 100 square feet of encroachment, and that case was denied, and they came back and said, well, we're submitting a particular plan for 90 square feet, they've reduced that and it's treated as a new application based on, so that would, in my mind, not be considered a reconsideration. A reconsideration would be that same 100 feet, but however, this particular time, they've added whatever, and the language that's written is new evidence that's, maybe that's a arborist that submitted a report or somewhat, whatever that might be, I don't know, but that same request as far as quantity, 100 square feet, is being reconsidered.
But all of this is predicated on the board having taken action on the first go-around, right?
Yeah.
So if the board decides, or if the applicant requests and the board agrees that the thing be tabled to a later meeting because issues were raised that they weren't ready to respond to, right? That's not a reapplicant, that's just a continuation.
That's just a continuation, correct, yeah. So if,
Let me just clarify, I misspoke, I looked at the code, and council can ask for a reconsideration at the next meeting, up to the next meeting.
Okay.
On following my other client, it's the day after.
I understand there may be a need for this. Sounds rare, but I think there may be. Can't tell whether or not it's gonna take 3 or 4 votes of the board to get through this process. Do we have to vote and agree that there's a misunderstanding, or that there was a misunderstanding if only one of us misunderstood?
so I can walk through what's presented today if you want me to kind of give you a little bit more context here. So,
That's one question in regards to Ben's question. If the vote passed and it passed and and I'm the only one that voted the wrong way, and then I realized that I voted the wrong way as nay, but the vote passed,
It's academic anyway.
it's academic anyway.
so this,
No, I'm just
Still
saying,
have to vote about, okay, we agreed that there was a misunderstanding. Okay, now let's hear about the misunderstanding. Then we're going to vote again whether or not we agree on.
right, but I guess what I was saying was, is that if I realized that, anyway, it doesn't.
so I do want to point out, so in number 20, I think
Understanding, yeah.
one of the important factors is in that third sentence, in granting of the motion, the BZA must find that it is misapprehended, misconceived, questions are involved, or erred in its finding of its disposition. So I think, for me, it's not sort of just arbitrary, I think I voted the wrong way, but there was something in that particular,
That's clear. I agree with you.
something in that particular discussion or application that we want to make sure the record is really clear before, even if this is appealed to circuit court, then our particular record as a Board of Zoning Appeals is clear.
Okay, and I understand the need for that too, but could it be something as general as saying, arises that would bring into question the outcome of the vote, it could be re-examined it could be brought again before the Board of Zoning Appeals.
So you're saying without having the board to vote on it?
Yeah, without going through all that, and then you bring it to us, and then we decide whether you're right or not. I mean, whether there is a misunderstanding or not without,
So my perspective as staff, and I mean, like I said, this is debate, we'll begin to craft language around it, but what's presented now is an avenue for the applicant to have a reconsideration and the board to have a consideration. I'd like to be still in that neutral presentation of staff, just not necessarily saying I'm re-advocating for the applicant to reconsider or the board reconsider. But I hear what
if I had second thoughts, okay, I'd much rather come to you and say, John, I think I screwed up. I think I made a mistake, rather than come to 7 people who have emotional connections already with that outcome, and the majority of them already have decided on what the outcome is, and for those same people to vote again on it. I thought if you would, as an independent person, bring it forward to the board and say, it's been brought to our attention that Ben has, and should we reconsider it?
Can I just play hypothetical here then? So if that was recognized, you would per staff to say, okay, a member of the Board of Zoning Appeals has brought this to staff's attention. We would like this case to be reconsidered. We'll put it potentially, whatever mechanism, decide whether that be at the next meeting.
Simplify the process and us deciding on whether or not one person understood it or not. That's the question. You understand these applications 10 times better than we do. I'm sure that we come to decisions that you don't always agree on with the way we vote. But the fact being that you can say, well, here, I don't know if you misunderstood it. Here's the facts behind it. I don't know, just to get 7 people involved in the whole thing again who are emotionally already tied to the outcome I don't think it's a fair process for the one individual who has second thoughts.
I mean, we can put the onus then, yeah, we'll have some internal discussions and maybe we can chat offline about this a little further.
But you could have a situation where you approve something where you really, really didn't want to approve it, so you've got another situation too. It's vice versa. Because you could have second thoughts on misunderstanding what you approved.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's really in that third sentence of, that's the qualifying piece for me, is that something was recognized that was either an error or misinterpreted, misrepresented. And so how do we actually clear the record on that? But like I said, if you guys have suggestions, please send those to me. Don't copy all, but just send those to me, or just give me a call and we can discuss what that might look like. We'll present this in another draft form. And even if we're not ready to actually vote on it at the next meeting, we can continue to just massage it as necessary.
There is a policy that favors finality of action, and has to be taken into account, right? You make a decision and the decision is done. So the circumstances in which that's reconsidered, have to be weighed against the policy value of the finality of a decision, which puts the onus on us to get it right.
And
Because
should be.
the applicant is,
a broader question.
the
I have.
applicant is counting on that finality.
Yes.
If it's a 6-1 vote, okay? I say, and I'm among the 6, and I said, I got second thoughts about this. I mean, does that have to come forward? Because that might influence 5 other votes. I mean, I don't know, about what I thought.
To that point, that's why that first clause was in there, that it would be brought back for you guys. So if it was 6 already voted and say, well, yeah, we strongly agree that the decision should be upheld, then we don't need to reconsider. In my mind, this really played out to when something was a 3-3 vote, right? And decision was disapproved because of a 3-3 vote. Did we really get a true finality to the application in question? There are a number of things at play, so I'm open to you guys' recommendations.
Get a revote on a 6-1.
You said no to 6-1.
You don't know.
So I mean, it just depends on the quorum. I mean, those
Walk
are,
the dog on this, yeah.
so I'll take that in consideration, no to 6-1.
Well, I mean, no, I'm just saying though, you raised that issue. Pretty broad, and it would affect everyone's vote. Unless it affects everyone's vote,
Just one other quick question. I know we discussed this, and I can't remember where it would belong. Where do we ever have the ARB ask them to have their landscaping plan actually submitted to us when they come for their presentations? I asked this once before. Is that something that wouldn't be in
So
this?
today in our code, we don't have a requirement for a particular landscape plan to be submitted as part of the zoning permit application.
Okay,
So most times, if an applicant is presenting a landscape plan, that means they've advanced this project in their design work independent of our town requirement.
but we say on so many of our pools and generators that, we'll approve this upon seeing your final landscape plan, and we never see it. So how do we work that into actually getting it so we know that it's gonna be done the way we approve it to be done?
So if you're saying that you want the Board of Zoning Appeals to approve that landscape plan, that would be a different type of condition, opposed to just the planning director give, but
Haven't we put that on conditions before?
The
Only for
condition
John
we've
to
done
look at.
is that we'll do it in, as long as the landscape plan that the ARB has presented
Okay, all right,
is
That
done.
goes to John.
yeah.
okay. But okay, that's,
So, yeah, we have received landscape plans for variance cases that ensuring that screening is provided or buffer
Right.
additional planting is provided. And so what those do is help mitigate the potential impact. And so we're just verifying
there
that.
have been times they haven't come with the landscape plan, but it says, we'll approve this with the landscape plan, and it never comes back to a landscape plan. Does anyone else remember this for some of these with pools and
Yeah,
landscape?
but John and his staff review it.
Oh, you,
We don't
okay,
review
you don't want to.
The last thing there is 24. This was just, something rarely happens, I think. I don't know if we've had one since most of you have been on.
Never had one since I've been on the board.
So this would be just in the event that there is an executive session. I don't know what that might be today, but we just wanted language in there that responds to that. So
What is the criteria that you have to meet in order to have an executive session? In other words, out of sight of the
So executive sessions are built into our state law, and they are appropriate. There's probably 20 grounds. The most commonly used ones are to receive legal advice, discuss contract negotiations, discuss personnel. But with the BZA, it would be to receive legal advice. And, how you do that is, you propose, staff or myself would propose to go into executive. You have to have a majority vote to go into executive. Then everyone has to respect that majority vote, which is what this amendment is basically saying. You might disagree with the vote to go into executive. But if a majority votes for it, you have to respect that decision and not discuss what's been discussed in the executives.
I'm hearing in other venues, this may have been an issue.
Possibly.
That's an executive session. Can I go back to 21? I know I'm not an attorney, but on line 6, there's the word "and." It bothers me. If it's determined new evidence has been found, then the case may be scheduled to be heard by the BZA. I don't understand the word "may" in there. Case will be rescheduled? I mean, if you've gone to the rigmarole to figure out that there's new evidence, then it seems to me it behooves you to hear the case again. So that's just a point in my weird brain.
I think it was more so putting the emphasis on making sure that the required notice, but I got you. We can look at it. Mr.
Good
Fairbrother?
discussion. We'll give John and Joe a chance to redo this language.
This is why
look at it
precisely
again.
we didn't want to have you vote on anything at one meeting.
Yeah, I now understand.
I had a whole phone call
I just
conversation
wonder
with him
about
about
that,
it
that's all.
already.
Still have a question down there.
Can I suggest that, Joe, you mentioned that there are numerous reasons why, most of which sound like they don't apply to us.
Right.
Include, something that applies to us for a reason for doing it, like whether it be legal consultation or whatever from those
I would
20 reasons.
really prefer not to.
Okay, so,
When you start like trying to duplicate what's already the law, you inevitably leave things out. I mean, the law is the law is the law.
I have no I've been on this board for many years, and I've never been in an executive session before, and I have no reason to understand why it would be, since we're a public audience.
Well, I think typically how it would work as a practical matter is when myself or staff get a question that might trigger one of the exceptions. I call them exceptions, one of the reasons for an executive session. Then I would suggest, I can't really get into that in open
Okay,
session.
if I suggested, we move into an executive session. Someone says, well, why would that be?
No.
That kid's not good, okay? So I've got to declare, all right? So the other members then say, well, that's not a good reason, we're not going to do it. Is that what's
So
how?
this-
That is how it worked, yes. I mean, you would have to, executive sessions have to be, typically they're on the agenda already.
Who's made that decision? What's our vote then?
Well, then you vote whether to go into
Whether to go or
executive
not?
session.
Oh,
You're not
I
letting
see.
me finish my thought, but typically it's on agenda, and you are required by law to give a general description of which exception you're falling under, and a general description of why.
For executive
Reasons for
session.
going into a session.
Maybe
Well,
if we're gonna do the executive session, we should list
Include
why
those in
we would
executive
request going into
Well,
an executive session.
shockingly, it works. I mean,
Like I said, I don't foresee the Board of Appeals going into executive session. We just wanted to make sure that language there is there in case. I mean,
the only time it's gonna happen here is if a legal question arises And then number one, it's obvious why we're going to executive session, to receive legal advice. And it will be obvious what that legal advice, the subject matter generally is, because
Do we have the power to make them tear their house down?
something like that, exactly.
And the purpose of it is that once an executive session, you have the privilege.
Correct.
I'd only suggest that we have two items, 20 and want to have something in there.
A quick question on the late submitted letters, Becky. If you get a letter from a next door neighbor, for example, copy of that given to the applicant? Say it's the next door neighbor saying, no way in hell I'm gonna be happy with this. Is a copy of that letter given to the applicant in advance of the hearing?
So we share it with you all and we share it with the applicant. Yeah.
So if a letter shows up 15 minutes before the meeting and raises something that the applicant needs, it's sort of a due process-ish kind of a question. Let it come in 15 minutes before the meeting
And
or
I
after the
think
meeting.
you speaking that is probably why that time frame of you being able to accept it for the record was in this clause.
Something to think about as you go forward with that particular topic.
So we can always have it tabled. I mean, those are, right, so those are things that could be considered.
So Phil, that happened. I don't know if you were here for that. I applied for a variance for, to put in a generator. And the night before the meeting, my neighbor sent a really interesting letter saying that my generator was
Great
going
adjective.
to, depreciate the value of his property because it was gonna, my generator is gonna be next to an empty lot between the two of us. That was his lot, but his generator has been facing me for 12 years and didn't, but I mean, it was, and he said, he goes, I didn't have enough time, I wanted my attorneys to look at this, and he asked, I think this should be tabled. And we went ahead with the vote. I mean, I recused myself, but we did have that happen this year. Lovely.
Then you blew up.
No, the next time he has a propane leak, I just won't call him.
But it's a fairness question. It's about fairness.
Yeah, I understand both sides of it, yeah, so, yeah. That's all for me, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Do you know yet whether we have a February meeting?
We will not have a February meeting.
No February meeting.
Okay.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Thank you, Daniel. We don't have any agenda items for February. However, I have reached out to potentially have a training on that same date. So hold a date for the 26th, yes.
And
Okay.
can I ask one more question? Can you start to look at continuing ed for?
Yep.
So we can,
So potentially, we will still have to be able to discuss this in addition to trash to see what the timing, how long, but maybe we don't
I'm
actually
sorry,
vote
I
on-
missed, what did Dan say about the February meeting?
So we don't have any agenda items to be considered. However, I want you like to still hold that date for we can actually potentially have a Board of Zoning Appeals training that day.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Can I ask one other weird question? We didn't have a December meeting, I was told, because somebody requested a full quorum.
So we
Which case was that, out of curiosity? Was it one of the ones we did today? Okay, thank you.
So typically, the quorum metric is something that we advertise, and we had, I think, a couple people who would only be virtual. And so that did impact that decision to move, so, yeah.
All right, anything else, John or anyone?
Can I change my vote from the first case?
No.
an executive session.
Executive session, good point.
All right,